So the title of my presentation is Better Understanding Diet and Health, Highlights from the Strong Heart Study and the Cooking for Health Study. So before we start, just a little bit of background about myself. I'm Mi'kmaq and I'm a member of Eel Ground First Nation. So for those of you not familiar with Canada, Eel Ground is in the province of New Brunswick, which is on the east coast of Canada. And most of my family still lives out on the reserve, but I've been in Seattle for 16 years now. I did my MPH and my PhD at the University of Washington, and then I stayed as a postdoc, and now I'm an associate professor in the Department of Epidemiology. Most of my research interests are in cardiovascular health, diabetes, nutrition, physical activity. And the reason I'm interested in these topics is because I saw growing up the burden of these diseases, these conditions in my family. And I have many aunts and uncles and cousins and my dad who suffered from uncontrolled diabetes. And my dad actually passed away from uncontrolled diabetes at the young age of 58 years ago. So in addition to my work, I'm also a mom, and I have two young boys. I have Gabriel, who's 5 years old, and Nathaniel, who's 20 months now. So I broke up my presentation into four different sections. So first, I'm going to provide a bit of background about heart disease and diabetes. Then I'll give you a brief background about the Strong Heart Study for those of you who may not be familiar with it. Then I'll talk about some of the findings in the Strong Heart Study that are related to diet and to health. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about our Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe Cooking for Health study, which is currently ongoing. So we don't have results yet, we're still enrolling, but it's a pretty exciting project, so I'm excited to just talk about it. So as way of background, the burden of diabetes and heart disease among American Indians is really high. So 1 in 6 American Indians have been diagnosed with diabetes. So this is more than double the prevalence in the general US population. Diabetes is a major risk factor for heart disease. And we know that rates of heart disease are also very high in American Indian communities, 50% higher than the general US population. And it's been hypothesized that the increase in incident diabetes and the increase in the incidence of heart disease in these communities is attributable, at least in part, to recent changes in lifestyle that started with the forced migration to reservation communities in many areas, as well as the adoption of sedentary lifestyles and Western foods and particularly processed foods. So most of what we know about diabetes and heart disease and cardiometabolic diseases in general in American Indians comes from the Strong Heart Study. So this is the largest multi-tribal study of heart disease in American Indians, and it comprises 12 different tribes from 4 states, Oklahoma, Arizona, North Dakota, and South Dakota. So the study was started in 1988 because at that time, little was known about heart disease in American Indian communities. And without factual evidence, it was actually believed that the prevalence of heart disease was lower among American Indian people relative to other race ethnic groups. But it's because of the Strong Heart Study that we now know that heart disease and related diseases have a much higher prevalence in American Indians than in other populations. So the study was really intended to measure rates of heart disease and risk factors in the population, and then more recently to identify risk factors, genetic factors in particular, that may be associated with that risk. So the Strong Heart Study is actually broken up into 2 different cohort studies. So we have the original study, which started in 1988, and that comprised mainly middle-aged and older folks between the ages of 45 and 74 years. There was about 4,500 participants who were in that part of the study. And they had 3 exams over a 10-year period. They had a baseline exam between 1988 and 1991, then a follow-up exam between 1993 and 1995, and then a 3rd exam between 1998 and 1999. And then in 2001, the study was reshaped to focus on genetic risk factors for heart disease. And the goal was really to map and identify genes that contribute to risk of cardiovascular diseases in the communities. So for that study, original participants who were members of large families were able to participate. And that was a much broader age range. So that part of the study included individuals between 15 years and older. And there were about 3,600 participants, and they came from 96 families. Again, very large families. So there were about 19 members per family. So we're talking about great grandmas, grandmas, cousins, aunts, uncles. So very, very large families. And then since the last exam in 2009, we've been following all participants for surveillance, mainly looking for development of different diseases, specifically heart disease. And we're currently planning for the upcoming exam, which is called Phase 7, and that will commence later this summer. And for that exam, we're going to bring in all the original participants as well as all of the family participants for another exam. So, there have been 3 exams in the original study, 2 exams in the family study, and then this exam that's coming up. And the exams are very, very comprehensive. So we're really grateful to all of the dedicated participants. The exams take much of a day. They include a personal interview, a physical exam, and a laboratory workup. And the various components have changed a little bit between the studies, but they generally include an interview to better understand changes, a baseline, just your personal and family history of disease, and then a follow-up changes that may have occurred over time. As well as lots of different questionnaires, things to measure social support, cultural identity, depression. There's a lot of questionnaires about health behaviors, so smoking, diet, physical activity assessments. Participants also have a physical exam, and this includes measurements of height and weight, cardiac function, and then there's a laboratory workup, and it includes things like lipids, blood sugar, renal function, as well as other measures. So at the Phase 4 exam, there was a dietary assessment that included a block food frequency questionnaire, as well as an American Indians food supplement, and that included foods that are commonly consumed in some of the communities, but may not necessarily, but are not part of the original block food frequency questionnaire, which was really designed for the general US population. So the supplement included foods like Indian taco, fry bread, spam, gusava, buffalo. These are foods that people may eat regularly, and it may contribute meaningfully to daily nutrient intake and daily caloric intake, but they weren't on that original food frequency questionnaire. So this is just a picture. It doesn't look like it's coming through very well, but you can see what a food frequency questionnaire looks like. So it has a list of foods, and participants are asked how often they consume the food. So never, a few times a year, once per month, 2 to 3 times per month, once per week, 2 times per week, 3 to 4 times per week, 5 to 6 times per week, and every day. And then for a lot of the different foods, there's also a question about portion sizes. So for things like eggs, it might be how many eggs you consume when you have during a single day. For other foods, it might be how many sandwiches. And then there were also some visual aids to show what foods look like in a bowl or on a plate, to give people a sense of what a portion size should be. So using this information, we were able to calculate the average macronutrient intakes for all of the study participants. At the Phase 4 exam, we also collected data on physical activity, and this was done using pedometers. Again, this was in 2001, so this was before the wide use of cell phones that have step counters in them. So essentially, participants wore a pedometer on their hip during waking hours for 7 days, and they were asked to wear it at all times except when they're bathing or when they're sleeping. And every day, at the end of the day, they would write down in a diary the number of steps that they took in that day. So we're able to get a good sense of the average physical activity levels, or at least ambulatory levels, walking, for the study participants. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of our findings. And again, I'm focusing mainly on the findings related to diet and to physical activity, because those are the areas that I'm most interested in that I work in. So the American Heart Association has identified 7 primary factors. So these are both health behaviors as well as clinical markers that promote optimal heart health. And they call these Life Simple 7. So it's factors like stopping smoking, being active, controlling your cholesterol, managing blood pressure, eating healthy, keeping an optimal BMI, so a BMI of under 25, and then reducing blood sugar. So this table shows achievement of those Life Simple 7 goals in the Strong Heart Family Study. Again, so that was, this is the phase 4 exam, which was in 2001, and the average age of study participants was about 37. So for the physical activity guideline, we use 10,000 steps per day as a marker of being active versus not active. And there's nothing magical about 10,000 steps per day. It's just a threshold that's been used in many different studies to identify someone who is active from someone who may be less active. But as I'll show you in a few slides, any activity, even accumulating 3,500 steps per day, is associated with benefit. But using this 10,000 steps per day threshold, about 12.4% were deemed to be active. I'll go over the dietary results on the next slide, but a healthy diet, according to the AHA, is achieving 4 dietary goals. And unfortunately, no one in the Strong Heart Study and also in the general population really meets those dietary goals. About 17% of study participants had a BMI of under 25, which is considered a healthy weight. As Ray mentioned, smoking levels are quite high. So about 50. So this was considered total cholesterol of less than 200 and not being on medications. 39% of participants had normal blood pressure and 50% of study participants had normal blood sugar. So this slide is showing achievement of the dietary goals. So on the x-axis here, you can see the percent of individuals who achieve the goals. And we have Strong Heart Family Study participants in yellow, and we have N-Haynes participants shown in red. And for those of you who are not familiar with N-Haynes, it's a survey that's done across the general U.S. population. So we're using it here as a marker of the general U.S. population. So as you can see, there's room for improvement in diet for all Americans. So in the Strong Heart Study, about 4% consumed 4.5 or more cups of fruits and vegetables per day. Less than 1% consumed 2 or more servings of fish per week. No one consumed 3 or more servings of whole grains per day. About 14% consumed less than 1,500 milligrams of sodium per day. And sodium, you know, some people think of it as a salt shaker, but it's really processed food that's the major source of sodium in the diet. About 29% consumed less than 36 ounces of sugar-sweetened beverages per week. 35% consumed 2 or fewer servings of processed meat per week. 2.4% accumulated less than 7% of calories from saturated fats. And about 23% consumed 4 or more servings of nuts, legumes, and seeds per day. And that was largely due to a pretty high intake of peanut butter in the population. So one of the many strengths of the Strong Heart Study is that it's longitudinal. So what I just showed you was just a snapshot in time. So at phase 4, how many people were meeting these Life Simple 7 goals? But the beauty of Strong Heart Study is that we have people come in, you know, every few years, so we have data over time. So we can look at changes over time in diet, as well as changes over time in health. So looking at your diet at phase 4, who goes on to develop diabetes and heart disease, and who doesn't? So what we found was that in one study that we did, which was on meat intake, specifically processed meat intake, was that participants who ate processed meat 2 or more times per week, they were twice as likely to develop diabetes than participants who never consumed or never reported consuming processed meat. So we saw pretty large effects. We also found that eating processed meat 2 or more times per week is associated with more rapid cellular aging. So you may wonder, what is cellular aging? So we have our biological age in years, 40 years, 50 years, but your cells also age throughout that. And this can be measured with a blood marker called a telomere. And a telomere is a region of repetitive nucleotide sequences at each end of the chromosome. And as you age biologically, the telomere will shorten over time. So what we found was that folks who were eating 2 or more servings of processed meat per week, they had more rapid cellular aging. So their telomeres were becoming shorter quicker than participants who never consumed processed meat, even after adjusting for the biological age. We also found that eating dairy foods, milk, cheese, and yogurt was associated with a lower risk of diabetes. And there's been a very wide interest in dairy intake. Historically, dairy products have gotten a bad rap. They are high in fat. But what we found was that folks who consume dairy and folks who were able to consume dairy had a lower risk of diabetes. And this could be for a variety of different reasons. Dairy includes a lot of different saturated fatty acids, including very long chain saturated fatty acids, which have been shown to have health benefits, particularly related to heart, particularly related to diabetes as well. And also folks who eat dairy may be eating less simple carbs than folks who are not eating dairy. And since many dairy products are pretty high in fat, it might help you feel full longer than diets that are comprised mainly of simple carbohydrates. We also looked at just healthy diet in general. So, just achievement of like a healthy dietary patterns. And what we found was that folks who consumed an overall healthy dietary pattern had lower levels of cholesterol and lower LDL cholesterol than folks who ate a much more Western diet pattern comprised of processed foods. In consuming a healthy diet, this last one hasn't been published yet. We have a student working on it now, but consuming a healthy diet is associated with a lower risk of albuminuria, which is a sign of kidney disease among participants without diabetes. So as far as this is, physical activity, we have this threshold that's used commonly in the literature of 10,000 steps per day. And this can be discouraging for a lot of people, specifically people who are inactive or who have a history of being inactive. Reaching 10,000 steps per day can seem very unobtainable. But what we found was that folks who took as little as 3,500 steps per day had a 29% lower risk of diabetes. So this is a really good public health message. You don't have to be a marathon runner in order to have benefits of walking. As little as 3,500 steps per day can really affect your health. In addition to looking at diet independently, physical activity independently, we looked at achievement of these Life Simple 7 goals. And again, this could also seem a little discouraging to people. You see all these goals and folks may say, well, there's a lot of things there, and they may feel overwhelmed and just close the American Heart Association website page and say, that's for someone else. But what we found was that compared to individuals who only achieved 0 or 1 of the goals, achieving as few as 2 of the goals was associated with a 60% lower risk of developing diabetes. So, if it seems overwhelming, just picking, 2 or 3 of these factors to work on has health benefits. So I think the major take-home messages from the Strong Heart study in the over 20 years that it's been going on is that there have to be improvements in diet and physical activity and obesity prevention. But how do we do that? I think what's missing and a lot of the time is really understanding the key barriers and facilitators to physical activity, to diet, and to factors that influence disease in these communities, and using personal community members' knowledge to really help design community-based interventions. So now I'll shift gears a little bit and talk about an intervention that we're working on. So, barriers and facilitators. So, we have this information from the Strong Heart study showing that, diet can be improved, physical activity can be improved. But really, what are the key barriers to keeping people from, choosing healthy foods? And I feel like we didn't have a good sense of that, at least from community members. So we started the Healthy Food, Healthy Families Feasibility Study, which was a small pilot study. And the purpose of that was to really characterize the local food environment in the Cheyenne River Sioux community using the USD market basket assessment. And that's important because, if you're developing an intervention, you have to make sure that you're including foods that are locally available, because having an intervention that's developed elsewhere and that incorporates foods not available in the community is not going to be effective. We also investigated the decision-making processes underlying family food purchasing patterns. And we did this through a series of 6 talking circles with community members. And we also had some key informant interviews with community stakeholders. And using all the information that we collected, we were able to develop an intervention called the Cooking for Health study that's intended to promote healthy food choices in the community. So just some results from the talking circles. So 3 main things came up. So cost of food, availability of food, and quality of food. So it came up repeatedly that fresh fruits, vegetables, and meats can be expensive. Canned items are cheaper. A lot of community members felt that some foods may not necessarily be available locally or maybe of poor quality, and that is particularly true during the winter with trucks coming in if it snowed. And another main thing that came up is that it's really hard to budget for healthy foods for an entire month. And this particularly came up for folks who are part of the SNAP program. We also interviewed store managers who have both convenience stores as well as the tribal grocery store that have the WIC program, the diabetes program. So lots of people who are key stakeholders in the food environment. A lot of what they said echoed what we learned in the talking circles. But as far as the grocery stores, we learned that prepackaged food, particularly microwavable food, is very popular. And the best sellers at the store are pop and chips. And this was at all the grocery stores, so the convenience stores as well as the larger grocery stores. And we also learned that the key stakeholders felt that this was happening because there's a lot of limited cooking skills in the community. It hasn't been passed down from generation to generation, especially in young people. So just a couple of quotes from our talking circle, which really points to SNAP. So on the 10th of the month, everybody's EBT rolls in at midnight. So on that night, on the 9th, they open the stores back up at 11 p.m. until 2 a.m. so you can go get your shopping done. Most people have run out of food and are hungry. They're waiting for the 10th. So this is really important. So, the SNAP program has done wonders in helping try to reduce food insecurity. But the federal government, markets it as a supplemental nutrition program. It's not intended to be a total nutrition program. But what's happening on the ground is that individuals who are participating in this program, at least a lot of them, are using it as a total nutrition program. So they don't necessarily have other funds that they can use to purchase food. So they only have what they have on the SNAP card and are relying on family and friends. So once you get towards the end of the month, food could be quite scarce. And then what we also learned was about food knowledge, cooking skills, and budgeting. So another quote from a participant, a lot of young single moms, they were never taught by their moms. It's not being passed down how it used to be. So having somebody do cooking classes where you can bring your kids and stuff and learn new recipes. And then someone else said, I think a good thing that could be done with the cooking classes would be budgeting, showing people how to budget your money, because that's a big part of it, what you can afford this week, and just try to make it as healthy as possible. So from this, we started the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe Cooking for Health study. And the intention and the goal was really to learn to make healthy and affordable diet choices with foods locally available. And the curriculum focuses on meal planning, cooking, and food budgeting. And we're working with the adult diabetes program. So the study is specifically targeting individuals who have type 2 diabetes. And our outcomes are improved cooking skills, healthier diet quality, and better control of blood sugar. The study is currently ongoing. So we hope to enroll 165 participants. It's being done using a randomized control design. So half of that 165 people will receive the intervention, the curriculum right away, and the other half will receive it at the end. And so it's 165 people. I think we're about 130 right now, so we're getting quite close. But if you know anyone in Cheyenne River who may like to participate, just reach out to us. And if it's successful, we really we plan to adapt and to expand this to other communities. And this study started in February of 2020, so it was right before the pandemic. So we've had to make some changes. Right now, what we're doing is when someone is enrolled in the study, and if they're randomized to the intervention arm, they receive a tablet. And on that tablet is all the videos, so cooking videos that are being led by a local person to show them how to cook different things. There's also a lot of videos on budgeting skills, weighing fresh produce, converting unit pricing into dollar amounts. So it's a pretty intense curriculum. If you want to read more about either the pilot work that informed the study or the protocol, both have been published. And yeah, so we worked with the community. We had talking circles to really try to develop the curriculum and get it right. We centered the curriculum around locomotive values. So this is just an example, and you can see it a little bit. But yeah, so we use Lakota values as a background for the curriculum, and every month there's a different topic. Getting healthy foods, vegetables, fruits, proteins, and meats, dairy, grains, food budgeting and meal planning, empty calories, snacks and eating on the go, traditional foods, and then celebrations. The way this works is we try to incorporate traditional foods into the curriculum. Next slide, please. And every month there comes up with a challenge. So there's a goals page. And to really incentivize people to interact with the videos and to interact with the curriculum, we have raffles every month. So people will send in a postcard if they complete the lesson, and then we do a raffle for usually one big prize and two smaller prizes, and it's something related to cooking. So it could be an air fryer, it could be a blender. There's gift certificates for the local charcoal grocery store. So we're really trying to keep folks engaged. Which has been challenging given the pandemic because there's a lot going on in the community. But so far it's been quite successful, and participants have been pretty pleased with the curriculum. And this is really a team project, so I'd like to recognize folks who I work closely with in the Strong Heart Study, as well as the Cooking for Health Study, and many of them are here today, as well as our funders. And I'm happy to take any questions. Yes?
Did you include
commodity foods? So a lot of our recipes are including foods that are available through the commodities program. That was one of the key stakeholders that we met with early on, was the head of the commodity program. So we learned a lot about what foods are available, and they actually have some recipes as well on the website of how to use them. But we included a lot of our curriculum recipes have commodity foods. Other questions? Yes. The recipe, so when you enroll in the study, you get a study binder, and all the recipes are in the binder. And then they're also on the tablet. And once the intervention is over and we have results, then we'll open it up for the whole community. Our goal is to hand this over to the tribal diabetes program when this is all done, so they can incorporate it into their programming. Yes.
Have you been able to connect at all with either farm to school or farm to institutional programs to kind of further the availability of those types of food items?
We haven't done that. That's a really interesting idea. Because that's another avenue for ours. Right now we're working with the adult diabetes program, the tribal diabetes program, and but children, a lot of habits around what to eat happen early in life. So kind of connecting schools, that's a really good idea. Yes.
Yeah, I was going to ask a similar thing. My brother is in Montana, and he works with the schools to develop. He's a chef who develops food programs to try to improve food quality and school lunches. It would be another kind of population to think about trying to do something like this this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, with the Michelle Obama campaign, this was years ago, there's been like an effort to change school lunches. And there was funds to do that, and then some of that got nixed recently, like sodium guidelines and things like that. But there is a lot of work that has to be done in schools. That is a good idea.